Well, welcome back to Collitalks Transformative Conversations. And as you know, I always say we're going to go deep, and today is no exception. This is the title today is The Subversive New Year. Yes, why your sovereignty terrifies the status quo. Interesting title, isn't it? Well, it's kind of a reminder, even to myself, that, while everyone else is going to be making resolutions to fix themselves, I'm actually making a degree to stop fixing everyone else. So, welcome. This is going to be a very interesting conversation, and I'm so delighted to be back. And I just really hope that everyone had a very peaceful, joyous time with loved ones, maybe not near, but maybe even on Zoom calls. We did a Zoom call, family Zoom call of our cousins from my mother's side, and it was very uplifting. It was very encouraging. It was so beautiful to be in the company, even though it was via Zoom. But thank goodness for via Zoom. So, I was thinking way back to when I was 13, and there was a real silence in our house. It had a tremendous weight to it. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket feeling. And I walked toward my mother's dresser and I opened up her drawer and I find this, a small yellow disc. And that little disc was a tablet called Valium. Now, I didn't take it to get high because I didn't even know what it was. I took it because I was lacking in courage at the time. And I thought, well, if my mom takes it, what harm could it do to me, right? And my mother certainly needed courage. So, courage, just to exist in a box that was already siphoning my life force. And I was paying what I call the black sheep tax for a system that couldn't handle my truth. I was very outspoken, very outspoken. I was an investigator at a very young age. I always wanted to go deep into finding truth. And so, a lot of people just couldn't handle my truth. And so I was taking the pill to be quiet enough to survive the environment I was born into. And I remember taking it only the one time. But, now as a doctor of trauma, and really the only specialist in Canada trained in both specialized kinesiology and beyond master in NLP and decoding the structure of language, I've actually spent 28 years decoding the structure of that pain. So my work isn't just about fixing a feeling, it has a threefold architecture to it. First of all, systemic trauma expertise is about locating the structural fracture in your identity and your lineage. Yes, in the identity, your identity. And then there's family and yoni constellations, which is, navigating the ancestral field to find where the mother womb line was severed. Because believe me, there are very, very, very few people that have a strong mother attachment bond that is healthy. So we go in and we find, where that mother womb line was severed. And then there's my PTTK method, which is pockets of through time kinesiology. And it's interesting because it's pockets of through time, because in life we move through time, right? Time doesn't stand still. So we move through time. But this is physically unplugging the trauma from your nervous system to reset your baseline. And, we're not just talking here, we are decoding the very structure of how your soul communicates with your body. And no one else right now is using this specific combination of language decoding, constellations, and muscle testing to get you back to your source. At least no one that I know about. And believe me, I do know a lot of people. So you know, there is a phenomenon I see in abusive systems that we need to name, and I call it systemic siphoning. Now, I was looking this weekend because there was time at photos of myself through the years, which are in a beautiful trunk that I have. And the reason I was looking at them, I just wanted to kind of look to see how I'm actually changing over the years. The physical, the facial. But, 15 years ago, when I was trapped in a not so healthy relationship, I looked haggard. I looked twice the age I do now. I'm not kidding. And today, as I stand in my own sovereignty, I actually look and feel younger than I did back then. Yes, because you might ask that, right? Why? Well, because I stopped being siphonable. You see, in relationships such as I was in, the woman often withers like a dead flower while the man blossoms. Yeah. I mean, just think about it. I've seen it happen a lot. He is using her nervous system as a human power strip, plugging his chaos into her life force. But here is the secret the system doesn't want you to know. Older women who know themselves are dangerous. Yes, we are. Because when we know our worth, our power, and our desires, we become unsellable. That's right. We become unsellable. You heard it. We become unsellable. So if the system can't make you feel small, it can't siphon you. If it can't siphon you, it can't survive. And your self actualization isn't just a personal victory, it's a systemic threat. See, decades later, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, my face was on a national billboard, 20 feet high. And interestingly, it was right above liquor stores, which was kind of ironic given my childhood. And, you know, I and my relationship. Part of the reason I left was because of alcohol. So I was the expert. The slogan read, "Face the issue." But as I drove past the billboard, my hands, I remember, were white knuckled on the steering wheel. And I actually going to work at 4 in the morning, and I would drive down this main road and I see this billboard and it's like, wow. And I looked at my hands, and not just because it was cold outside, but they were, tightly gripped, white knuckled on the steering wheel. Sure, I was the expert on the sign, but I was still a target of systemic siphoning in my private life until I wasn't. And interestingly enough, that night I reached for a glass of wine. I reached for wine that night because that was just the 2024 version of the yellow tablet, the Valium. I didn't continue drinking, but that night I did. And it was the search for the courage to bridge that gap between the professional mask and the personal exhaustion. You see, we medicate the black sheep tax because being the regulated one in a dysregulated world is a full-time job. And interestingly enough, my very good friend, who is a top psychologist in Canada, he told me when I was going through a bit of challenge with this relationship before I left, he said, being in a relationship with an alcoholic, whether in recovery or not, is a full-time job. So we, you know, are tired of decoding everyone else's language while we, you know, own, while our own source is starving. So I chose not to starve. I chose to reconnect to me. And I was mentioning this conversation that we had with my family. I learned about my grandfather, who was a man. He was Polish and he was silenced by a store owner in the 50s. And walking out of the store, he was so traumatized, he never spoke Polish again. Now that is linguistic erasure. And my work in family constellations, yoni constellations, is a systemic reclamation of that lost voice. Yeah, it didn't start with me that I would become, you know, a voice for truth, a voice on a podcast. My unique ability to decode the structure of language today isn't just a professional skill. It's actually a lineage restoration. You know, there have been times with various episodes that I've done. There is my, little itty bitty shitty committee brain going back, nitter natter, pitter patter. And the old program, says, oh, maybe you could have, should have, would have, all that stuff, done it a little bit better. But, then I realize there are people ready for the absolute personal power. And if you are listening to my podcasts and you've downloaded them, which there have been many, you are a resident. You are so ready for the absolute personal power. And this shift to sovereignty happens when you realize that you have the bread now. Through systemic work and constellations, you know, we stop you from being the battery for everyone else's blossom. You don't need a chemical of any sort to have courage when you have alignment. And I'm not talking about the alignment that is sort of the running tab of the town in terms of so many people talking about it. I'm talking about alignment that comes when you actually can, when I have worked with people and do what is called, the circle of excellence, I actually have them physically, whether it's in person or online, step into that circle of excellence to see if everything is in alignment, in that environment and you know, with those capabilities and those skills and those beliefs and those values. What is your identity there? And going on beyond that, the transmission link, you know, who else is involved? Because there always has to be someone else involved in order for the alignment, your alignment, to be aligned. So you're no longer the child at that dresser. You're no longer the person painting the walls of a system that refuses to fix its own foundation. And as we enter this new year, remember, you are the cartographer of your own life. And welcome, welcome, welcome home. As I said before, I'm Colli, Dr. Colli Christante. Let's build your architecture of power, starting now. So until we meet again, which will be in the new year, have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful, wonderful life. And just know I'm here. You can reach out anytime because that's what it's all about, is having a relationship, one of truth, and that allows you to keep your sovereign source. So lots and lots of love.